My father called Grandpa's inheritance worthless and demanded I sell it and give the money to my brother. I never thought a pile of old film canisters would change my life. But sitting here in my cramped Seattle apartment, turning this vintage Leica camera in my hands, I can't help but smile at the irony. In 2017, while everyone was chasing TikTok trends and Instagram fame, I was saving every tip from my car wash job to buy this old film camera. It cost me 3 months of soggy shoes and pruned fingers, but it was worth it. My grandpapa always said, "Film is like jazz. Each frame sounds different." His voice still echoes in my head, 6 months after he passed. The camera feels heavier tonight. Maybe it's the weight of memory. Maybe it's because today marks exactly half a year since Grandpa left us. I still can't delete his number from my phone. I dig through my drawer and pull out a faded photograph. 2 figures by Lake Tacoma. Grandpa and 10-year-old me, holding fishing rods and grinning like we discovered gold instead of catching a single measly trout. Those summers at his cabin were magic. Grandpa Paul wasn't like other adults. He never talked down to me or told me to get my head out of clouds. Instead, he'd hand me his old Leica and say, "Don't press that shutter until you feel the frame breathing." I had no idea what he meant until one evening when the sunset turned the lake to fire, and suddenly I felt it, that moment when everything aligns and the world is holding its breath. He was a Korean War vet who somehow landed a gig as a photography assistant at NASA in the 60s. My family rolled their eyes whenever he mentioned it. But to me, his stories were better than any movie. The astronauts would be cracking jokes while I lugged tripods around Cape Canaveral. He'd tell me while Frank Sinatra played on his ancient record player. There I was, dreaming about their coffee while they were dreaming about the stars. I learned more about composition and light in those summer weeks than in any photography class I later took. While other kids were playing video games, Grandpa was teaching me how to develop film in his makeshift darkroom, a converted bathroom that perpetually smelled of chemicals and possibility. My family never understood our connection. My dad, the accountant with a spreadsheet for every penny, and my mom, obsessed with stability, poured everything into my older brother Jake, the golden child with Harvard law ambitions. They viewed my photography as an expensive hobby at best, a waste of time at worst. Jake wasn't any better. "Eric, those film rolls are your ticket to a museum, and not as an exhibit, as a janitor." He'd laugh while washing his precious 2015 Mustang, the car our parents bought him for getting straight A's. When Grandpa would tell stories about NASA, my dad would exchange looks with my mom. "Dad's embellishing again," he'd whisper, thinking I couldn't hear. Those NASA stories get taller every year. I didn't care. I believed Grandpa. There was something in his eyes when he talked about those days, a spark that couldn't be faked. When he died last winter, I was devastated. The funeral was brief, practical, just like my dad planned it. Grandpa would have hated it. No Sinatra, no stories, just an efficient send-off for a man who deserved so much more. Then came the will reading. Dad got the house in Portland. Jake got $20,000 toward law school. And me, I got Grandpa's cabin by Lake Tacoma. My dad's face turned an interesting shade of purple when the lawyer read this part. "That pile of rotting wood," he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. I tried to hide my excitement, but my heart was racing. The cabin. Our cabin. A week later, we had a family dinner. The kind where everyone smiles until the dessert arrives. Then the real agenda comes out. Eric, my mom sighed, cutting her pie into perfectly even pieces. "Be practical. That cabin needs repairs we can't afford. The property taxes alone will eat your savings. Sell it. Invest in something worthwhile. Maybe help with Jake's tuition. He's our future." I felt something snap inside me. And what am I? Not your future? The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. My dad set down his fork with a clink that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet. "Listen, son," he said in that voice he used for difficult clients. "We've supported your photography hobby for years. We bought you your first camera. We let you drop out of college to find yourself. But this fantasy has an end. That cabin is worth at least $80,000 if we fix it up and sell it." "It's not for sale," I said, surprised by the steadiness of my voice. "It's mine. Grandpa left it to me." My dad's face hardened. "Then you have a choice to make, Eric. Either sell that cabin and put the money towards something that benefits this family, like Jake's law school, or you can pack your things and go live there yourself. Maybe some time alone in the wilderness will knock some sense into you." "You're kicking me out?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. My mom wouldn't meet my eyes. "We're asking you to be a part of this family, to contribute. Jake has a future ahead of him. And I don't." The words hung in the air. Jake finally spoke up, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Bro, don't be dramatic. Dad's right. That cabin is your chance to actually help the family for once." I looked around the table at these people I'd known my entire life, feeling like I was seeing strangers. They weren't bad people, just practical ones who couldn't understand why anyone would choose passion over security, who couldn't see value in anything that couldn't be measured in dollars. "I'll be out by the weekend," I said, standing up so abruptly my chair nearly tipped over. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced my small room in my parents' house, the room that apparently wouldn't be mine much longer. 19 years old, working at a car wash, community college dropout, and owner of a worthless cabin. On paper, I was exactly the disappointment my family thought I was. But something Grandpa said kept playing my mind. Life is like film. You never know what will develop until you dip it in the dark. I stared out my window, watching shadows from passing cars dance across the ceiling. Maybe the cabin wasn't just a building. Maybe it was Grandpa's final gift, a chance to find my own path, a lifeline thrown just when I needed it most. By morning, I'd made up my mind. No way was I selling that cabin. Inheritance? I expected treasure and got spiders and creaky stairs. Grandpa's probably trolling me from heaven. I laughed at myself while packing my few possessions. I didn't have much to take. Some clothes, my camera equipment, a laptop held together with hope and duct tape, and Grandpa's records, the Sinatra collection he'd insisted I take for safekeeping months before he passed, like he somehow knew what was coming. I ran my fingers over the faded photograph of us fishing one last time before carefully placing it in my backpack. "I'll prove you right, Grandpa," I whispered, fighting a lump in my throat. My eyes were wet, but there was determination behind the tears. My mom stood in the doorway as I loaded my last box into my 2005 Toyota Corolla, a car my dad called a financial mistake, but that had faithfully carried me through 3 Seattle winters. "You don't have to do this, Eric," she said softly. "Just be reasonable. Sell the cabin." I closed the trunk. "I can't. It's not just a building to me, Mom. It's everything Grandpa believed in. Everything I believe in. Your father's just trying to do what's best for everyone." "No," I said, finally understanding. "He's doing what's best for Jake. He always has." She didn't deny it. She just hugged me awkwardly and pressed a $100 bill into my hand. "For gas," she whispered, then hurried back inside before Dad could see. My dad didn't come out to say goodbye. Jake sent a text just as I was pulling away. "Good luck playing mountain man. When reality hits, your room's still here if you sell the cabin." It was the closest thing to sentiment my family could muster. The engine coughed reluctantly to life, protesting like an old man woken from a nap. The cabin was a 3-hour drive from Seattle. I'd mapped the route, but realized I didn't need to. Some paths you just remember, no matter how long it's been. Grandpa's Sinatra record sat on the passenger seat. My camera equipment filled the back. A few pairs of jeans and some T-shirts were stuffed in a duffel bag in the trunk. It wasn't much to show for 19 years of life, but it felt like enough. As the city faded in my rearview mirror, replaced by evergreens and mountains, I felt something I hadn't in years: freedom. The kind that comes with having nothing to lose and everything to prove. If this is a disaster, I said the empty car, at least it's my disaster. The road stretched ahead, winding toward Lake Tacoma, toward the cabin, toward whatever waited for me there. I had no plan, no real skills beyond washing cars and taking pictures, and no idea what I'd find. But for the first time in my life, I was making my own choices. and that felt like the greatest inheritance Grandpa could have left me. The mountains grew large on the horizon as my Corolla struggled up the inclines. Seattle was long gone now, and with it, the weight of expectations I'd been carrying. Whatever waited at that cabin, even if it was just spiders and memories, it was mine to discover. I rolled down the window, letting the cool mountain air rush in. Somewhere in the distance, I could almost hear Grandpa's voice. The best photographs are the ones you haven't taken yet. I was heading toward an unknown future, guided only by the memory of a man who believed in me when no one else did. The road twisted ahead, leading to a place that everyone else thought worthless, but that might just hold the key to everything. By the time I reached Lake Tacoma, the sky had opened up. Just my luck. If this was a universe sending me a sign about my new life choices, it had a twisted sense of humor. If this is my fresh start, I definitely ordered the verge without the flood. I muttered, squinting to the windshield as my wipers fought a losing battle against the downpour. The narrow dirt road leading to Grandpa's cabin had turned to mud, and my poor Corolla protested with every bump and dip. When the cabin finally came into view through the curtain of rain, my heart did a strange little dance, part excitement, part terror. It looked smaller than I remembered. The wooden structure stood silhouetted against the darkening sky, its windows like empty eyes staring out at the lake. The porch sagged slightly on one side, and the steps leading up to it had seen better days. But it was there, solid, real, mine. I made a mad dash from the car to the porch, my duffel bag over my head, in a useless attempt to stay dry. The keys stuck in the lock at first. Everything swells in the damp Pacific Northwest. But after some coaxing, the door swung open with a creak that sounded exactly like the opening of every horror movie ever made. The smell hit me first, pine, dust, and something else. Old books, maybe. Memories, possibly. The floorboards announced my entrance with dramatic squeaks as I stepped inside. In the darkness, I could make out the shapes of furniture draped in white sheets, like ghosts of summers past. The rain drummed steadily on the roof, creating a rhythm that was somehow both lonely and comforting. I fumbled for a light switch and found one near the door. Nothing happened. Of course. Electricity would be too easy. I sighed, digging out my phone to use as a flashlight. The battery was at 20%. Perfect. I moved cautiously through the cabin, pulling sheets off furniture to reveal Grandpa's old couch, a coffee table made from a split log, and his reading chair by the fireplace. Each item uncovered brought back a flood of memories. Hot chocolate on that couch, card games on that table, Grandpa in that chair, telling stories as the fire crackled. The kitchen was small but functional, with an ancient refrigerator that hummed like it was planning something sinister. The tap in the sink sputtered before producing a stream of rust-colored water that eventually ran clear. I had water at least, and when I checked the fuse box in the back room, I discovered the problem was just a trip breaker. One flip later, and the cabin reluctantly joined the 21st century with the buzz of electric lights. Home sweet home, I said to the empty room. My voice sounded strange, too loud in the quiet space. The storm outside showed no signs of letting up, so I set about making the place livable. I found drywood stacked neatly in a box beside the fireplace. Grandpa's last act of preparation, perhaps. It took 3 matches and some colorful language, but soon a small fire was casting dancing shadows on the walls. In the bedroom, I stripped the musty sheets from the bed and replaced them with the ones I brought from Seattle. The mattress was lumpy in places I didn't remember, but it beat sleeping in the car or on the floor. As the cabin slowly warmed, I unpacked my meager possessions. My clothes barely filled one drawer of the old pine dresser. My camera equipment looked almost comically modern on the weathered desk by the window. I was hungry, but too exhausted to drive back to town for supplies. A search of the kitchen cabinets yielded some canned soup that was still within its expiration date. Barely. Grandpa had always been prepared for anything, including, apparently, his grandson's impromptu arrival years after his death. With soup warming on the ancient stove, I continued exploring. The cabin wasn't large, just a main room with a fireplace, the small kitchen, 1 bedroom, and a bathroom that had definitely been designed for someone shorter than my 6-foot frame. There was also a small storage room off the kitchen that was stacked with fishing gear, tools, and boxes labeled in Grandpa's neat handwriting. But it was what stood in the corner of the main room that caught my attention: Grandpa's old record player. I ran my fingers over its wooden case, remembering how he would carefully place the needle on his favorite records, filling the cabin with music that seemed to belong there, like it had grown from the same trees as the walls. I rummaged through my bags and found the Ella Fitzgerald record I brought with me. It felt right that she should be the first voice to welcome me here. As her warm, smooth voice filled the cabin, I closed my eyes for a moment. Grandpa used to say, "Ella sings so sweet, even the owls stop to dance." I could almost hear him saying it now, feel his hand on my shoulder as we stood listening. The soup was bland but hot, and I ate it standing by the window, watching lightning illuminate the churning surface of the lake. Despite everything, the rain, the musty smell, the uncertainty of what I was doing here, I felt a strange sense of peace settling over me, like I'd been holding my breath for years and could finally exhale. After dinner, I wandered around, really looking at the place now. On a bookshelf built into the wall, I found Grandpa's photo albums. I pulled one out and began flipping through it, shots of the lake at different times of day, a deer emerging from morning mist, and then one that made me stop. 5-year-old me, grinning with a fishing rod almost twice my height, a tiny trout dangling from the line. I looked so proud in that picture, so completely happy. Grandpa had seen beauty in everything, even in a skinny kid with a crooked smile and a fish too small to bother cleaning. He'd taken that photo like I'd caught a 20-pound salmon, preserving that moment of pure joy forever. The first night wasn't exactly smooth sailing. The cabin made all sorts of noises, creaks and groans, as if it was having a conversation with itself. The wind found every gap in the weathered walls, whistling through hidden cracks. And then there was the wildlife. Day 1. Discovered a spider the size of a hamburger. I wrote in the notes app on my phone, starting a cabin journal. Day 2. Realized I'm not the owner here, just a tenant. Mr. Spider has seniority. That first week was a crash course in rustic living. I drove into town for supplies the morning after I arrived, stocking up on essentials: coffee, ramen, more coffee. The locals at the general store gave me curious looks, but were friendly enough when I explained I was Paul Henderson's grandson. "Old Paul's boy, huh?" said the man behind the counter, studying my face like he was trying to find my grandfather in my features. He was good people, always had a story and a smile. I spent my days cleaning, fixing what I could, and exploring the property. The cabin sat on 3 acres of land that sloped down to a private stretch of lakeshore. I found Grandpa's old rowboat pulled up under a stand of pines, covered with a tarp. It needed work, but seemed salvageable. In the evenings, I'd take my camera down to the water's edge, trying to capture the way the setting sun turned the lake into molten gold. I posted my best shots on Instagram, tagging them hashtag Lake Tacoma and hashtag FilmIsNotDead. My followers list wasn't exactly breaking the internet. A handful of friends from Seattle, some photography accounts, and about 50 spam bots. My first lake sunset photo got a whopping 3 likes. One from my Aunt Marge, one from a guy I'd worked with at the car wash, and one from someone called Photolad69, who was definitely a bot. My photography career has officially tanked, I told Mr. Spider, who had taken up residence in the bathroom corner, apparently enjoying the steam from my showers. But I kept shooting anyway, falling into a routine that felt strangely right. Wake up, coffee, explore, photograph, edit, sleep, repeat. No parents judging my life choices. No brother making me feel inadequate with every breath. Just me, the lake, and my camera. It was on the 5th night that everything changed. I was looking for a specific Sinatra record I remembered Grandpa playing on summer evenings. The shelf next to the record player was cluttered with vinyl, but the one I wanted wasn't there. Thinking he might have stored it elsewhere, I started poking around the built-in cabinets that flanked the fireplace. Behind the record player, I found a small door that I'd overlooked, thinking it was just part of the paneling. It opened to reveal a shallow storage space, and there, pushed to the back, was a wooden box about the size of a small suitcase. It was handcrafted with a simple brass latch, and had what looked like initials burned into the lid, along with some abbreviations. KCP 1965/SM-SIM, /Cape Canaveral, private. My grandfather's handwriting. My heart started pounding as I carefully lifted the box out. It was heavier than I expected, and something inside shifted when I moved it. The latch was stiff but not locked, and when I finally got it open, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Inside were dozens of metal film canisters, each labeled with dates and cryptic abbreviations. They were wrapped in yellowed newspaper, and when I carefully unfolded one sheet, the headline jumped out at me: Kennedy vows moon landing by decade's end. My hands were actually shaking as I lifted one of the canisters. Was this what I thought it was? Had Grandpa really been filming at NASA during the Apollo era, like he'd always claimed? Grandpa, I whispered to the empty cabin. Were you secretly filming aliens or something? I knew I needed to see what was on these films, but I had no idea how. The canisters contained what looked like 16 millimeters film. Ancient technology to someone who had grown up in the digital age. But if Grandpa had kept the film, maybe he'd kept a way to view it too. The storage room yielded nothing, nor did the bedroom closet. I was about to give up when I remembered the small attic space accessible from a hatch in the bathroom ceiling. I'd ignored it during my initial exploration, assuming it held nothing but insulation and possibly rabid raccoons. Standing precariously on the edge of the bathtub, I pushed the hatch open and hoisted myself up, my phone flashlight clenched between my teeth. The space was cramped, dusty, and full of exactly what you'd expect: old suitcases, Christmas decorations, a broken fishing rod, and then, in the corner, a large case covered in a sheet. When I pulled the sheet away, I found what I was looking for: an old Bell and Howell film projector, complete with reels and a take-up spool. It looked like it belonged in a museum, covered in a thick layer of dust, but when I carefully carried it downstairs and plugged it in, a small light glowed red. The machine hummed to life. My hands were clumsy with excitement as I threaded one of the films onto the projector. I'd chosen a canister labeled simply Simulator Test 7/65. The bulb in the projector cast a bright beam onto the blank wall of the cabin, and then the film began to roll. The first images were grainy, jumpy, clearly amateur footage, but what they showed made my breath catch in my throat. Men in early space suits, moving around what looked like a mock-up of a spacecraft interior. The camera panned shakily to show complicated control panels, and then focused on a man adjusting his helmet. I recognized him instantly from history books and documentaries. Buzz Aldrin, decades younger but unmistakable. He was laughing at something off camera, then looked directly into the lens and smiled. A voice came from behind the camera, my grandfather's voice, young but recognizable. "Looking good there, Buzz. Give the folks at home a wave." Aldrin obliged with a salute. Then another voice, sharp and concerned. "Paul, turn that thing off. This is supposed to be classified." The film jumped and cut to a different scene, what looked like a cafeteria. Men in short-sleeved white shirts with narrow ties sat at tables, some looking at papers, others engaged in animated conversation. The camera zoomed in on a coffee cup with the NASA logo. I sat in stunned silence as the film ran out. My grandfather had been there. He hadn't been exaggerating or making things up. He had been right in the heart of the space race, filming what looked like Apollo mission training. My mind was racing. If this one film contained such incredible footage, what did the others hold? I spent the next several hours threading film after film onto the projector. Some showed more training sessions. Others contained footage of massive rocket components being assembled. One even showed a launch from a distance, the camera shaking with the force of it. It was nearly 3 a.m. when I finally stopped, my eyes burning from focusing on the grainy projections for so long. I needed to document this, to share it somehow. These weren't just family mementos. This was history, forgotten in a cabin by a lake. My laptop was old and slow, but it had a decent camera. I set it up to record a projection of what seemed to be the clearest footage, the clip of Buzz Aldrin in the simulator. When I had a digital version, I uploaded a short 15-second clip to Instagram with a caption: "My grandfather apparently filmed something for NASA. Anyone know what this is? Hashtag NASA history, hashtag Apollo, hashtag vintage footage." I didn't expect much, maybe a few comments from space enthusiasts. I closed my laptop, finally crawled into bed, and fell into exhausted sleep, dreams full of rockets and astronauts and my grandfather's voice. The buzzing of my phone woke me up. Sunlight was streaming through the curtainless windows, and for a moment, I couldn't remember where I was. Then it all came flooding back. The cabin, the films, the late-night discovery. I grabbed my phone to check the time and saw that it was flooded with notifications. My Instagram post had exploded overnight. 70,000 views, thousands of likes, hundreds of comments. Dude, that's Apollo training footage. Is that Buzz Aldrin? For real? Where did you find this? This is incredible. NASA needs to see this historical gold mine. I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. My post had been shared across multiple platforms, picked up by space enthusiast groups, historical archives, and even a few news outlets. My DMs were full of messages asking for more information, requesting interviews, or offering to buy the footage outright. I'd expected maybe 100 views, not to go viral overnight. I stared at my phone, watching as the notification count continued to climb. What had I done? What was I supposed to do now? I thought the best thing about this cabin was the lake view. I said aloud to the empty room. Turns out Grandpa left me a ticket to the stars. I remembered something he used to say when we developed photos in his makeshift darkroom. A photograph is a moment you rescue from being forgotten. Looking at the wooden box of film canisters sitting on the cabin floor, I realized he hadn't just rescued moments. He'd rescued an entire era. My email pinged, then pinged again, and again. Overnight, my inbox had transformed from a wasteland of promotional emails to a flood of inquiries. The NASA History Office wanted to verify the footage. A curator from the Smithsonian was asking for a phone call. National Geographic wanted to know if I had more. I held the wooden box in my hands, feeling its weight, the history it contained. Grandpa, I whispered, you left me more than just a cabin. You left me your story. The morning light caught dust particles floating in the air, making them look like tiny stars. Outside, the lake was calm, reflecting the perfect blue of the sky after the storm. Inside, my life had just been blown wide open by a box of old film that everyone but me had thought was worthless. I set my phone down, suddenly overwhelmed by the weight of what had happened, what was happening. My email notification pinged again, and I glanced at the preview. From NASA Archive Department. Subject, regarding Apollo training footage. With trembling fingers, I opened the email, feeling like I was standing on the edge of something massive, something life-changing. Whatever was coming next, I knew one thing for certain. These weren't just old films. This was something much, much bigger. I sat at Grandpa's old oak desk, sipping coffee from a chip mug with Moonshot 69 printed on the side. Found it in the back of a kitchen cabinet. The irony wasn't lost on me, drinking from a NASA souvenir while staring at emails from actual NASA officials. When NASA emails you, you're either in a Hollywood movie or in serious trouble. I'm still deciding which one this is. I muttered to myself, watching new messages pour in faster than I could read them. I needed expert help. These films weren't just family mementos. They were potentially historical artifacts. After carefully packing 3 of the most promising reels in bubble wrap, I drove to Seattle the next morning to meet with Professor Alan Martinez at the University of Washington's Film Preservation Department. These are 16mm films, probably Kodak stock from the mid-60s, Professor Martinez said, examining the canisters under a special light. Remarkable preservation. Your grandfather must have stored them properly. Cool, dry conditions. He didn't make any promises, but offered to run preliminary tests on a small segment to confirm authenticity and assess the condition. I left the films with him, feeling strangely like I was abandoning a child at kindergarten. 3 days later, he called. These are genuine 1960s films. No question. The chemical signature and film stock matched the era perfectly. And the content, well, you should come see for yourself. Back at his lab, Professor Martinez showed me high-resolution scans he'd made of selected frames. Look at the details in this equipment. the early Apollo Command Module simulator. And this man here, he pointed to a clear shot of a smiling astronaut. That's unmistakably Buzz Aldrin. These appear to be training sessions for Apollo missions. The professor was visibly excited. With your permission, I'd like to send these scans to a colleague at the NASA History Office. This could be significant historical documentation. I nodded, still trying to process that my grandfather's NASA stories weren't exaggerations. They were understated. Dr. Eleanor Richards, senior archivist at NASA, requested a video call the very next day. Her expression when I showed her the wooden box of film canisters told me everything I needed to know. Mr. Henderson, according to our records, your grandfather Paul worked as a photography assistant at Cape Canaveral from 1964 to 1967. But these films, they're not part of our official archives. She explained that most photography at NASA facilities was strictly controlled. Official photographers documented test flights, press conferences, and formal training. But what I had found was different. These appeared to be unofficial recordings, candid moments, behind-the-scenes glimpses that weren't part of the official documentation. Some of this may have even been classified at the time. So my grandfather was, what? Breaking rules. I asked, unsure how to feel about this revelation. Let's say he was preserving history that might otherwise have been lost. Dr. Richards replied diplomatically. Many of the casual moments, the human side of the space program, weren't captured in official documentation. She requested permission to send a preservation specialist to examine all the films. This wasn't just about Grandpa anymore. This was about American history. The specialist, Dr. Tamarachan, arrived 3 days later with equipment that made my laptop look like a children's toy. As she carefully examined each film canister, she explained the preservation process, how they would digitize everything without damaging the originals. Your grandfather had an incredible eye, she commented, viewing segments through a portable scanner. Most technical photographers just documented equipment. He captured people, their expressions, their humanity. We spent a week going through every film. Each canister revealed new treasures, astronauts joking during training breaks, engineers puzzling over equipment, the controlled chaos of Cape Canaveral in the height of the space race. One film showed a cafeteria scene, astronauts and engineers sharing coffee, unaware of the camera. My grandfather's voice, soft but clear, July 5th, 1965. The men who will touch the moon eating Tuesday's meatloaf. Dr. Chin carefully cataloged everything, creating a preliminary archive with dates, people identified, and technical notes. The intimate glimpse into America's greatest technological achievement was unprecedented. These weren't staged publicity shots. They were authentic moments caught by someone with insider access and a photographer's instinct. NASA would like to formally request permission to include these in our historical archives, Dr. Richards said during our next video call. With full credit to your grandfather, of course. These films fill gaps in our visual history of the Apollo program. It felt right to share Grandpa's work with the world. But I was surprised when Dr. Richards mentioned that other organizations had expressed interest after seeing the initial assessments. The Smithsonian Air and Space Museum is particularly interested, and National Geographic has reached out about a potential documentary. I nearly dropped my coffee. National Geographic? Seriously, things accelerated from there. The university's legal department helped me navigate the sudden interest in Grandpa's films. Within 2 weeks, I was in discussions with National Geographic about a documentary feature. They wanted not just the films, but the story behind them, my grandfather's work and how I discovered them. Their initial offer stunned me. For $100,000 for exclusive rights to the footage and my participation as a consultant, more money than I'd ever imagined having. I found myself with business cards, contracts to review, and conversations about rights and historical significance. The cabin became a temporary headquarters, with preservation specialists carefully working through each film reel. The first article about the discovery appeared in a small Seattle newspaper, then a larger piece in a national science publication. A week later, a small feature on a history website went viral when space enthusiasts began sharing it across social media. My Instagram following exploded overnight. from a few hundred friends to thousands of space and history buffs. My phone needed constant charging from the notifications. Through it all, I kept thinking about Grandpa. What would he make of all this attention? He was never one for the spotlight. His joy came from capturing moments, not being in them. As the National Geographic deal moved toward finalization, I decided to use some of my newfound resources to honor his legacy properly. I upgraded my camera equipment and enrolled in online cinematography courses through NYU. If I was going to tell Grandpa's story, I wanted to do it with skill that would make him proud. Each night, I'd review another of his films, studying his technique, the way he framed shots, how he caught candid expressions, his instinct for finding the human element in technical settings. The camera sees the truth, but you have to tell it. He'd written on the back of an old photograph. Those words became my mantra as I prepared for my first major interview, a popular photography podcast that wanted to discuss the technical aspects of preserving vintage film. The podcast led to more attention, a local TV station, then a regional news program. Each time, I focused on Grandpa's work rather than myself, the history he preserved, the moments he captured. When CNN called about featuring the story on their weekend program, I assumed it was a prank. But the producer was persistent, explaining they wanted to highlight American artifacts with unexpected historical significance. The night before the CNN interview, I found myself pacing the cabin, second-guessing everything. What did I know about being on national television? I was a car-wash dropout living in a cabin, not a media personality. But when the cameras started rolling in the Seattle studio the next day, talking about Grandpa and his work came naturally. Words flowed as I described finding the footage, the thrill of seeing those forgotten moments come to life. "What do you think your grandfather would say about all this attention?" the host asked. I smiled, thinking of Grandpa's quiet humility. He'd probably be embarrassed by the fuss. He never saw himself as important, just someone lucky enough to witness important events. "And where were these historic films all this time?" the host pressed. Without thinking, I replied, "Just sitting behind his record player, like Indiana Jones's Lost Ark." The line got a laugh from the crew, and later, when the segment aired, it went viral in its own right. Twitter exploded with memes. Eric and the Lost Film Ark featured my face photoshopped onto Harrison Ford's body. The CNN piece changed everything. Suddenly, I wasn't just a guy who found old NASA films. I was a personality, a story people connected with. The quiet kid whose family didn't believe in him, who inherited a worthless cabin that contained historical treasure. 2 weeks after the CNN interview aired and several online articles featured my story, my phone lit up with a text from Jake. "Bro, just saw you on CNN. Your grandpa's NASA stuff is insane. You're famous now. Any chance you could float me a couple grand for my summer courses? Law, books are killing me, man." I stared at the message, a knot forming in my stomach. After ignoring me since I'd moved out, this was what prompted him to reach out? Before I could respond, my phone rang, Dad's number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me hit accept. "Eric," he said, his voice carrying that forced casualness he used when talking about money. "Your mother and I saw the news. Quite a discovery you've made there." "Yeah," I replied, suddenly wary. Turns out Grandpa wasn't making up those NASA stories after all. "Well, I'm man enough to admit when I'm wrong," Dad said with a laugh that sounded rehearsed. "Listen, son, about the cabin. I might have been hasty in my judgment." I said nothing, letting the silence stretch uncomfortably. He cleared his throat. "The thing is, Eric, we're family, and family shares good fortune. Your mother and I have been struggling a bit with the mortgage, and Jake's tuition." My fingers tightened around the NASA mug. "Where was family when you kicked me out? When you called the cabin worthless? When you said I'd never amount to anything?" "That's not fair," he said, his voice hardening. "We were trying to motivate you to be practical, to find direction." "No," I replied, surprised at myself at the steadiness in my voice. "You were trying to make me be Jake, to follow your plan instead of finding my own." "Eric, don't be selfish." My mother's voice cut in. She must have been on speaker. "Jake is our future. He's going to be a lawyer. He needs our support. The familiar refrain hit differently now. Jake is our future. Not Jake and Eric are our future. Just Jake. I've got to go, I said, ending the call before they could say anything else. The phone immediately rang again. I turned it off. The National Geographic contract was finalized with help from an entertainment lawyer who'd reached out after seeing the CNN segment. The Smithsonian wanted to exhibit the original footage alongside NASA's official archives. My bank account now contained more money than I'd ever imagined, and my calendar was filled with appointments that would have seemed absurd just months earlier. The cabin was no longer just a refuge. It had become a workspace. I set up proper lighting to digitize the remaining films, installed satellite internet that cost more per month than I used to make in a week, but allowed me to collaborate with archivists and historians across the country. One night, after a long day of catalog work, I sat on the cabin's porch watching stars reflect on the lake's surface. Grandpa used to point out constellations, telling me stories about each one. Stars don't fall, Eric, he'd say. They wait for you to find them. I was just beginning to search for the stars, for myself, for whatever path lay ahead. The weight of responsibility felt heavy some days. I wasn't just preserving film. I was preserving history, my grandfather's legacy. The photo of us fishing sat framed on my desk now. I'd look at it during video calls with museum directors and NASA officials, a reminder of why this mattered. This is for you, I'd whisper to his smiling image when imposter syndrome threatened to overwhelm me. 4 months after finding the films, I received an official invitation from the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum. They were planning an exhibition, Hidden Moments, the Unseen Apollo, featuring Grandpa's footage as a centerpiece. They wanted me to attend the opening as a guest of honor. Me, guest of honor, at the Smithsonian. The boy who had been kicked out of his house for being a dreamer was now being celebrated for preserving dreams that had changed the world. I walked down to the lake, to the spot where Grandpa and I used to fish. The invitation clutched in my hand felt impossibly heavy, impossibly significant. I'm just getting started, aren't I? I said to the memory of him. The ripples on the water seemed to nod in agreement. The next day, I drove into the city and bought my first suit. Nothing fancy, just something that fit properly and wouldn't embarrass me in front of astronauts and museum directors. Standing in the fitting room, staring at my reflection, I barely recognized myself. Not because of the suit, because of the confidence in my eyes that hadn't been there before, the purpose in my stance. As I drove back to the cabin, I thought about the journey ahead. I was ready for the exhibition, ready to share Grandpa's legacy with the world. But was the world ready for the full story? For the truth about a quiet photography assistant who had secretly preserved history when no one was looking? There was only one way to find out. Standing in front of the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum in a suit that pinched like a broken promise, I felt like an imposter. My reflection in the glass door showed someone I barely recognized. Hair actually combed, shoes actually polished, tie actually straight. Like James Bond who forgot the password to his own spy account. Deep breaths, Eric. I muttered to myself. They're just astronauts and NASA legends. No pressure. The exhibition, Echoes of Apollo, was opening tonight with a private reception for museum donors, former NASA personnel, and one very nervous former car wash attendant. Me. Inside, the exhibition space took my breath away. They transformed the gallery into a journey through the Apollo era, with my grandfather's footage as the emotional heart of the display. Large screens showed carefully restored clips, astronauts laughing during training, engineers huddled over equipment, the human side of the greatest technological achievement in human history. And there, on the central wall, a massive photograph of my grandfather, camera in hand, standing beside a Saturn V rocket component. His shy smile looked down on everything, as if embarrassed by the attention, but secretly pleased. The curator had found that photo in NASA's archives and made it the centerpiece of the biographical section about the forgotten chronicler of Apollo. When they played the audio clips we restored from some of Grandpa's reels, I nearly lost it, his voice echoing through the gallery. This isn't just about reaching the moon. This is about touching a dream. People stopped in their tracks to listen. Some of the older guests, former NASA employees, nodded in recognition, One elderly engineer approached me with misty eyes. I remember Paul. Quiet guy, always with that camera. We never realized he was capturing history. The night was surreal. I shook hands with an actual Apollo astronaut who remembered my grandfather. Paul had a gift, he told me. He saw what the rest of us didn't, that we were just ordinary guys doing an extraordinary job. That night marked the beginning of an incredible year. The exhibition traveled from Washington to Los Angeles, then Tokyo, then Paris. Grandpa's images, once forgotten in a cabin by a lake, were now being celebrated worldwide. National Geographic's documentary, The Forgotten Lands, Paul Henderson's NASA, premiered 6 months after the Smithsonian exhibition. I watched it in a packed theater, still unable to believe that the nervous kid talking on screen about finding film canisters was actually me. When it was nominated for an Emmy in the documentary category, my phone exploded with congratulations from people I'd never met but who felt connected to the story. A story that began with a worthless inheritance and a stubborn grandson who refused to sell. The money from a National Geographic deal and subsequent licensing agreements changed everything. And nothing. I could have bought a penthouse in Seattle or a sports car to rival Jake's precious Mustang. Instead, I poured most of it back into preserving Grandpa's legacy. The cabin underwent a careful restoration, maintaining its rustic character while adding modern comforts. The creaky porch was rebuilt with the original wood, the patchy roof replaced, the leaky windows sealed. But I kept the old record player exactly as it was, positioned by the fireplace where it had always been. The back room became a professional darkroom and film studio, equipped with both vintage and modern cameras. Not just a home, I told my first official visitor, my personal launch pad. That visitor was Amanda Mitchell, curator of the Retrospective Photography Museum in Seattle. We'd met at the Smithsonian opening, bonding over our shared love of analog photography in a digital world. Photography is a way to stop time, she'd said, quoting Ansel Adams while examining one of Grandpa's prints. Then I've stopped 1965, I'd replied, making her laugh. Our first real date was coffee at a tiny shop near Pike Place Market. For hours of conversation about film grain, darkroom techniques, and dreams we'd never shared with practical-minded people. When she said, "You're the first person I've met who loves film more than Wi-Fi," I knew I was in trouble. 6 months into dating, we began collaborating on a photography book highlighting both Grandpa's NASA work and my own emerging portfolio. We called it Light Echo, like astronomical light echoes, where light from the past continues to illuminate the present. Working together, we discovered more about Grandpa's technique, his eye for composition, the way he captured human moments amid technological backdrops. With each discovery, I felt closer to him, understanding his vision in ways I never had when he was alive. The book deal came together quickly, with a major publisher offering an advance that still seemed unreal to someone who'd been counting car wash tips a year earlier. But the project I was most proud of came a year after finding the films. Using some of the proceeds from the documentary, I opened a small gallery in Seattle called Light Echo, dedicated to analog photography in the digital age. The main exhibition space showcased rotating displays of Grandpa's NASA work alongside contemporary film photographers. In a smaller, more intimate room, visitors could listen to audio recordings from Grandpa's reels, his quiet observations about the people behind America's space program. Every frame is an act of love for the world. His voice would tell visitors through headphones, as they viewed as images of astronauts and engineers. The gallery became an unexpected sanctuary for people seeking connection to the past. I'd often find visitors sitting quietly in the audio room, eyes closed, listening to Grandpa describe a sunrise at Cape Canaveral or the nervous energy before a test launch. One evening, I watched an elderly couple embracing in front of a photo of Mission Control during Apollo 11. The woman was crying softly. Later, she explained that her father had worked at NASA during that era. "This isn't just a gallery," she told me, squeezing my hand. "It's a time machine." Those moments made every struggle worthwhile. This wasn't about money or fame. It was about preserving connections to history, to family, to the dreams that define us. I wanted to be a rock star when I was a kid. I joked with Amanda one night as we closed the gallery. Instead, I'm a film hipster with a gallery. Even my dog barks in vinyl. She laughed, but her eyes were serious when she said, "You're preserving something important, Eric. Not just your grandfather's work, but a way of seeing the world that we're losing." Sometimes, standing in the gallery surrounded by Grandpa's images and stories they told, I'd feel an overwhelming sense of purpose. The lost kid who'd been kicked out of his parents' house had found not just a path, but a mission. My family, meanwhile, kept their distance, except when they needed something. Jake occasionally texted, always casual at first, always eventually circling around to hints about his financial needs as a struggling law student. I was preparing for an interview with a photography magazine when the gallery door chimed one Tuesday afternoon. Looking up, I froze. My father and Jake stood awkwardly near the entrance, examining the space with unconvincing interest. Dad had aged in a year since I'd last seen him. More gray in his hair, deeper lines around his eyes. Jake looked the same, confident, expensively dressed, like someone who expected the world to make way. "Nice place," Dad said, as if we'd spoken yesterday. "Very artistic." I nodded, waiting. They hadn't come for the photography. Jake broke first. "Dude, this is legit impressive. The Emmy nomination? The book deal? You're crushing it." Their small talk lasted exactly 5 minutes before my father cleared his throat and got to the point. "Eric, we need to talk about family matters. Your mother and I, we've hit some financial rough patches. The mortgage is underwater, and with Jake's law school expenses. You're swimming in it now, right?" Jake added with a forced laugh. "I mean, National Geographic, the book, this place. You must be loaded." I felt my heart constrict. A familiar tightness formed in my chest. Part of me had been expecting this visit since the documentary aired. Another part had hoped they'd surprise me with genuine pride instead of opportunism. "Eric," my father continued, his voice taking on the tone he used when closing business deals, "family helps family. That's what your grandfather would have wanted." My grandfather. They were invoking him now. The man whose stories they dismissed, whose legacy they'd valued at zero until it came with dollar signs attached. I held an old film canister in my hand. I'd been showing it to visitors earlier, explaining how these humble metal containers had preserved history. Now I turned it slowly, feeling its weight, remembering Grandpa's words. Light captured on film is truth, but truth can sometimes cut. They were watching me expectantly, waiting for me to open my wallet as easily as they closed their door on me. I looked past them to a large photograph on the wall, Grandpa and me fishing at the lake, both grinning at some forgotten joke. I'd done everything I could to honor his memory, to make him proud. But what would he say about this moment? Family is like photographic paper. I said quietly more to myself than to them. You develop it and find both shadows and light. Jake shifted uncomfortably. Dad maintained his business smile, though it was fraying at the edges. "Eric," Jake finally said, his voice dropping its practiced confidence. "I didn't get before. I'm sorry." Dad nodded. "We're your family. Whatever happened, we need your help now." I studied their faces. A mixture of shame and hope, genuine need and calculated approach. The hardest photographs to take, Grandpa once told me, are the ones where you can see both a person's strength and vulnerability in the same frame. "I forgive you," I said after a long moment. "Not for you, for myself. I can't move forward carrying resentment." Their expressions brightened, but I wasn't finished. "But this legacy, these films, this gallery, they're not yours. They never were. You didn't believe in Grandpa's stories. You didn't believe in me. This isn't your story to profit from." I pulled 2 tickets from my desk. "These are for the gallery's anniversary event next month. Come see what Grandpa left to the world, what he left to me. Then we can talk about family." Amanda, who had been quietly working in the back office, appeared in the doorway. She gave my hand a gentle squeeze. "You did the right thing," she whispered as my father and brother left, tickets in hand, expressions unreadable. That evening, I drove back to the cabin, my mind replaying the encounter. The confrontation I both dreaded and needed had finally happened. not with shouting or drama, but with a quiet clarity that surprised even me. At the lake, I sat on the dock with Grandpa's old Leica, capturing the sunset on film the way he'd taught me. The water was perfectly still, reflecting the sky's orange and purple like a mirror. I thought about the cabin, no longer worthless in anyone's estimation, but valuable for reasons my family still couldn't fully comprehend. Not because of the money it had brought, but because of the memories it held, the legacy it preserved. The cabin was never just boards and nails, I said to the fading light. It was memory made physical, a vessel for something more important. Later, in the cabin's darkroom, I developed the sunset photos alongside a final shot I'd taken. A self-portrait reflected in the lake water, Leica visible in my hands, the cabin silhouetted behind me. As the image emerged in the chemical bath, I saw something my grandfather would have appreciated, the continuity of his story into mine. The kid who'd been kicked out for dreaming had become a man who preserved dreams. "I've become part of your story, Grandpa," I whispered to the darkened room, "and you're forever part of mine." In the main room, I set Sinatra's My Way on the record player, the same album Grandpa played on summer evenings. As the music filled the space that had changed my life, I smiled at the thought of him watching. "If Grandpa's looking down right now," I said to Amanda when she called to check on me, "he's definitely yelling, 'Eric, hold the focus, not the tissues.'" She laughed, understanding perfectly why humor and emotion were so intertwined in this moment. After we hung up, I sat on the porch, watching stars emerge above the lake. Another thing Grandpa taught me: photographs aren't the only way to capture light. Sometimes you just need to sit still and let it find you. Life, I was learning, is like film photography. Every frame matters, but you choose which ones to develop, which moments define your story. My family had focused on only one narrow version of success. Grandpa had shown me how to widen the frame, to capture something more meaningful. As Sinatra sang about "Do It His Way," I felt a profound peace settle over me. The path ahead wasn't certain, the gallery, the book with Amanda, whatever came next, but it was authentically mine, chosen, not imposed. "We did it, Grandpa," I said to the night sky. Together, the stars twinkled in response, like distant flashbulbs capturing the moment. In photography and in life, endings are just another type of beginning, the exposure complete, but the story continuing beyond the frame. And in that moment, sitting on the porch at cabin once deemed worthless, surrounded by memories made precious through time and perspective, I understood what my grandfather had been trying to tell me all along. The most valuable inheritances can't be measured in dollars. They're measured in the light they bring to the darkness, and the truth they reveal when properly developed.